Oh my God, new vulnerability exposed in Azure.
Jim, I understand the Mirai botnet has done a little pivot on us here.
Yeah, it has, John. Thanks. So, uh, this month in the September Microsoft patches, there were some patches for some vulnerabilities in an open management infrastructure software agent. And what they were doing was closing up a hole that some researchers had found that they dubbed, OMIGOD, because this vulnerability in the OMI, the Open Management Infrastructure software, allowed unauthenticated root access to Linux servers that were running this OMI management software. In particular, it seems to be used quite a bit in Azure, so lots of virtual machines running in Microsoft Azure, cloud space. And it turns out the particular remote code execution vulnerability, all you had to do was send a packet to the OMI interface and remove the authentication header. It's normally supposed to be authenticated, where in the headers to this web packet, this HTTP, HTTPS packet, one of the headers is an authentication header, which has an encoded version of a username and password or some sort of a token there. But it turns out that if you simply remove that header completely, it will still execute the command that you sent to this management interface, and it'll execute it as root on the Linux server. So fortunately, the patches are all out, and as soon as people became aware of it, and like I said, the patches came out about 2 weeks ago, and the vulnerability itself, information about it was published the next day. So it's been 2 weeks now that people have had to fix it. And if you get your patches automated, you should have been able to update your software already. It isn't necessarily turned on by default everywhere, but it yeah, it was one of those vulnerabilities that you're kind of scratching your head about. But it's also another thing that you shouldn't have your management interfaces exposed to the world anyway. I mean, we talked about that on this show. Probably every time I've been on this show, back to when we first started, John Hogoboom and I have been on it since the very beginning, and we've always said, don't expose your management interfaces to the internet. Well, this is another example of that. So even if you weren't patched, as long as you blocked the 3 ports that this listened on, which is 5985, 5986, and 1270 TCP, as long as you blocked those, you were in pretty good shape. But yeah, another one of these management interfaces exposed, and now just making a connection and removing the authentication headers from the HTTP transaction would allow unauthenticated root access to Linux servers in cloud environments. And of course, within 48 hours of these patches being released, the Mirai botnet or one of the Mirai botnets had picked this up and was starting to scan for those ports, especially the 5986, the SSL version.
If I spin up a VM, I mean, will this already be patched? I know that's one of the questions I would ask.
If you're spinning up a brand new one, yes. And depending on the image that you're using to create your virtual machine, you may or may not have this OMI agent in there anyway. A lot of people that I know that have stuff going on in Azure didn't have the agent to begin with, so they were not vulnerable to begin with. Personally, I have a VM that outside of work that I run in Azure that never had the agent itself to begin with. So, but those that did, some of them weren't aware that the agent was in the image that they were using as their base image. So that was a little bit of an issue, that some people may have been vulnerable to it, not realizing that they had this OMI agent in there to begin with. But yeah, so one of the results is that almost immediately, like I said, within 48 hours of the patches coming out, we were seeing this activity, the scanning activity, and some friends of mine that have some honeypots in Azure were seeing a whole lot of this traffic spike almost immediately. I don't know if we're going to look at those ports in the internet weather this week or not, but
I did I've got a chart on that, so we'll take a look in the internet weather.
Okay, good. I was hoping you would.
Yeah. I saw your note, and so I did pull a chart up on that. I guess one of the things that, we were talking about, remote management interfaces being exposed to the internet. One of the things about cloud that's always troubled me lately is that, just by its very nature is very, especially commercial cloud stuff, unless you're really careful and try to set up a very closed private network for yourself and that you might do as a corporation. But smaller businesses, they might just have their stuff just exposed right out to the internet, just as like a regular Azure VM. And that can, open up a lot of vulnerability unintentionally if you don't know what you're doing. And, I like cloud because it allows you to really work rapidly, but it also sometimes the rapidness that you could work at allows you to maybe work too rapidly and miss some, security exposures that you're not really expecting because you're so quick to be able to set something up, or you're not having extra people kind of say, well, wait a second, why is this open, et cetera. So,
right. Yeah. And if you don't control those, security groups, your firewall rules, whatever your particular cloud provider, whatever they call them, but those default rules on what is exposed, if they start out wide open, which many of them do, then you are potentially exposing things that really don't belong exposed there. If they start out closed, where you have to explicitly open everything up, then you're probably in a little better shape. But you have to know what all your particular application needs to expose.
I'm just thinking back to, a lot of that projects I've worked on, even currently, it seems like when you spin up something new, or even not even an instance, just a normal system, the default is just install everything and remove it, right? Rather than start from, like you said, a closed environment and start opening. It's like open it all up and then figure out what you can remove later on. And a lot of people, I shouldn't say most, but a lot, I think, don't close everything. They just say, okay, it's working, it's great, I'm not going to touch it. And then but you don't know what you got running anymore.
The other thing that is also a little concerning to me is that, nowadays with cloud, you also have a lot of people who might be developers as opposed to sysadmins that are configuring and setting policy for a lot of their virtual machines or Docker containers or whatnot. And they can't figure out why it's not working, so they just eliminate the firewall so that it just works. I know we've run into that scenario in some cases, in stuff we've looked at, but that kind of stuff always worries me too with cloud. So, you have to have really good, I know there's a lot of tool sets out there for cloud too to help monitor your security policies and whatnot. in your environment. So, I recommend people use those where available. I think Azure, I'm not a cloud expert, but Azure has something that checks your security policies on your VMs. And I know there's some other third-party products like Dome9 and some of these other things. So anyway.
Yeah, well, that was exactly the point I was going to make. Yeah, I can't remember the number of times that we've run into cases where a developer says, well, just open it up so that the application will work, instead of trying to figure out exactly who needs to talk to who. And
Right.
So exactly that point is what I was thinking too. We probably don't teach our developers, secure application development well enough these days, although that's better than it was, 35, 40 years ago when I was starting to program. Nobody thought about security at all. So I'm sure it's gotten better since then, but probably still not to the point where we need it.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I guess now, do people need to do anything if they have Azure VMs currently that might have had this enabled, or did Microsoft kind of take care of that for them?
Well, if you have a VM that's running this OMI agent, make sure that it is up to date with patches, and I'd also block those 3 ports from the internet too. But if you have the OMI agent on any of your virtual machines, make sure that it's at least 1.6.8.1. But then I'd also block those 3 ports from the internet.
Yeah.